Hello and welcome to our series on India's wars since its independence to mark the 75th year of India's independence. And in this episode and in the following one, I'm going to explain to you what led to India's military intervention in Sri Lanka in the late 1980s that eventually gave the Indian Army as many, if not more, casualties than the entire operations over Bangladesh in 1971. So, what led to it? The divide between the Sinhala majority of Sri Lanka and the Tamil minority of Sri Lanka really started after the high-handed attitude of the Sinhalese population following a constitutional change in Sri Lanka, where Sri Lanka in 1974 became from a secular democratic republic to a theocratic republic. What's a theocratic republic? It's a republic where a particular community or a caste or a group of people become the dominant element and other citizens are second class. And therefore, the Tamils began to feel short-shifted. They were denied various privileges that normal citizens get. They were not given the kind of funding and resources for the development of the Tamil areas if you looked at the map of Sri Lanka, that lay on the northern and eastern edges of Sri Lanka, which is closer to the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. Discontent led to unrest. Unrest led to a certain amount of confrontation between the majority population and the Tamils. And finally, there was a sort of influx of refugees in Tamil Nadu through the coastal waters that very closely lie between the borders of southern Tamil Nadu and northern Sri Lanka. Tamil Nadu's Chief Minister, Mr. M.G. Ramachandran, was keen that India undertakes military operations in Sri Lanka from as early as 1983. But India's then Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, was not keen on getting engaged in a military confrontation because one reason was that India had a lot of internal problems of its own. The Punjab insurgency, at the same time the ongoing northeastern insurgency, and the Indian Army was getting involved in border confrontations with Pakistan around Jammu and Kashmir. However, by 1984, the Sri Lankan government ordered its small military but well armed to go hammer and tongs after the Tamil population. This led to a lot of unrequired or ill-informed operations, a lot of civilian harassment, killings, and generally steamrolling tactics adopted by the Sri Lankan forces. India, on the other hand, discreetly started providing the Tamils a certain degree of support by training and arming them in a similar manner that India had done with the Mukti Bahini in the outskirts of then East Pakistan before the 1971 war. Perhaps the view was that maybe similar efforts could be imposed to give the Tamils some element of a support system to counter the high-handedness of the Sri Lankan forces. But matters began to get out of hand. The Sri Lankan Tamils were soon denied basic humanitarian support systems, food, medical aid, clothing, etc. So India then decided, by 1987 May, Sri Lanka's armed forces launched full-fledged military operations against the Tamil population. India, on the other hand, noticing, and much pressure came to Delhi from the local governments of Tamil Nadu, which insisted that India must support the Tamil population in Sri Lanka, which had their origins on the Indian mainland. So India decided to send a flotilla of about 19 boats with food, equipment, medical aid, humanitarian assistance, etc. This was pushed back by the Sri Lankan Navy. So patience in New Delhi began to run out, and therefore an Indian air flotilla was launched with about 6 AN-32 aircrafts. These are transport aircrafts carrying foodstuff and humanitarian assistance that were to be paradropped into Sri Lanka. They were provided military protection by 4 Mirage 2000 fighters with a clear message to Sri Lanka that if these were resistors, they would be taken care of by military force from the Indian Air Force. There was no resistance, and clearly Pax Indicana was born. But what followed thereafter was a sense of exuberance and too much of self-confidence amongst South Bloc and India's policymakers in New Delhi. One of those people who was very influential in the operations was General Krishnaswamy Sundarji, who was a bright and a rather controversial army chief that India's army had at that point of time, and who began to put together a thought process that India's military intervention would require military forces, but they would go in like the wind and come out like the wind, and therefore the operation was named Operation Pawan. Records show, and I'm talking from a book authored by none other than a former army chief, General Baid Malik, in which he talked about how the briefings in the military operations rooms in Delhi were only attended by General Sundarji and a whole handful of military officers. There was rarely, if any, attendance by senior Air Force and Navy operations. So this was clearly post the airdrop in Sri Lanka. This was clearly some thinking was going into making it a military army centric operation. What also happened that Sri Lanka then approached its friends in the West, United States, UK, even Pakistan, for military assistance to fight the Tamil Tigers. All of them declined or suggested to Sri Lanka that use the assistance of India because it's your closest and powerful neighbor. So with much reluctance, the Sri Lankan president approached the government of Mr. Rajiv Gandhi. A beaming Rajiv Gandhi with his advisors was soon setting out to land in Colombo to sign the very controversial Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord in end July 1987. The accord was signed around 27th of July. There was massive opposition to that in Sri Lanka, but most importantly, hardly any political personality of consequence was present during the signing of the accord. Even the LTT leadership was not there, and this accord was essentially meant to enforce a peace arrangement between the Sri Lankans and the Tamils. But the Tamil representation was not there. So eventually, the accord was signed between India and Sri Lanka, and a peace accord ended up becoming an enforcement accord, because in a peacekeeping arrangement, two parties to the conflict, here the Tamils and the Sri Lankan Sinhalese, should have been signatories to the accord, but the Tamils decided to abandon it, despite having engaged a lot with the Indian government in the past. Mr. Prabhakaran, who was the leader, had at least come to Delhi twice and spoken to the Indian government about how he could work with India for a peaceful settlement there. But when push came to shove, he was a deceitful character, and he abandoned any effort by India to give this accord a semblance of respectability. So by 29th of July 1987, the Indo-Sri Lankan Peace Accord had gone into play, and an Indian peacekeeping force was flown into Sri Lanka. This was the 54 Indian Army Division, which is the reserve division of the Indian Army, and a division has a fighting strength of about 7,000-8,000 soldiers. It has a lot of military equipment, has guns, mortars, artillery, vehicles, everything, and it came in. It was told that you're going to go there to seek the surrender of the Tamil Tigers, but clearly their role was not clearly defined, and everything became a seriously botched up operation. How this happened, I'll explain in the next video.